I got to see Michelle Obama on tour when she came to DC for the Becoming tour. And I had the option of going the first night or the second weekend. And I picked the second weekend, and the first weekend she brought out Barack. And the second weekend, she didn't really bring out anybody. And I was like, are you kidding me? I picked the second weekend and I don't even get to see a real celebrity other than Michelle Obama, obviously. What are people saying? Who else did people invite? Sorry, the music. I don't have, my Spotify is not connecting today. So you're not getting music. You're getting just me talking. Yeah. Same thing.
Lizzo. Mm-hmm.
Lizzo would be a good one. Didn't she just do an HBO documentary series too? I think she just did one. I'm trying to think of who else I would have. Really, I would probably want to have like some outrageous people to ask them. Like my late night talk show would be all about HR. So it'd probably be like very boring people that nobody wanted to listen to. Just kidding. We're all really interesting. I would get like bad CEOs and I would call the segment like, you're a bad CEO. And then I would read their Glassdoor reviews and see what people would say. Wouldn't that be great? Am I the only one who wants this as a real event series? Like, should I be go pitching this to people? Like, you're a live segment event where I read Glassdoor reviews and then I ask the CEO to tell me if they're true or false.
You like roast them live.
Yeah. Like, the mean texts that Jimmy Fallon used to have celebrities read mean texts about them. It would be like that, but mine would be Glassdoor reviews, true or false. And then I would make people tell me if they were true or false. Okay, we're getting to that 103 mark. Let's dive in. So I hope everyone got a chance to tell us who you would invite as your first guest. I think mine still stays Drake or any bad CEO I can find to join. Diving in, it is the season finale of HR Therapy. If you've been with us through all 6 episodes, congratulations, you made it to the end. No one is being pushed off a boat tonight. If you watched White Lotus, that's just a funny reference to that this week. But we are talking about my favorite topic, pay transparency, and there's probably so much to be said about it. At the top of every event, I like to thank Questus and Newsstand, my 2 sponsors, who allowed me to have this brilliant season where I got to talk about whatever I wanted to talk about and invite all my friends to come on and tell me their thoughts and feelings about things. And today I have Lola Han, CEO and founder of CompSA, joining us, and she will introduce herself in just a quick second. Before we dive in, our agenda is the same as it always is. I always like to have this so everyone knows what we're going to go through. You're going to meet Lola. We're going to do our Q&A. I have 4 questions queued up already. Then we're going to go to live questions. So as we're talking, please go ahead and submit questions. I know there's a lot of talk around pay transparency, what it is, why it matters. Any sort of questions you have about compensation, we're both happy to take them. And then we'll wrap with what's next and then celebrate the end of HR Therapy Season 1. Notes before we dive in. This is being recorded. I hope you all heard that at the beginning. The chat can be very distracting. So if you don't want to pay attention to that, minimize that. And then finally, there's like a notes document. I love having a space for y'all to take notes as we're talking. So I shared that in the chat and it outlines what our 4 questions are and what we're going to talk about today. So now I get to introduce you to Lola. Lola, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Absolutely. I'm Lola Han, founder and CEO of CompSA, which means appreciation in Korean. I'm also the former head of compensation at companies like Zendesk, helped over 500 companies at this point with their compensation needs. CompSA provides real-time market compensation data across 60 countries. We're essentially a one-stop shop for compensation. So job leveling quickly, leveraging our machine learning technology, establishing your comp ranges, aligned to your comp philosophy.
Thank you for joining me today. I am a big Lola and CompSA fan, so you'll hear me talk about that throughout this entire event. She did not pay me to say anything of any of these nice things, by the way. These are my own opinions, but I'm Hippa Yusuf, the creator and founder of I Hate It Here, also our host of this wonderful session called HR Therapy. I hope you've gotten to know me over the last few weeks. If this is your first time here, welcome. I have the habit of just saying what I'm thinking, and I'm so excited that Lola's here today because she is the same way. So before we jump in, I always like to have a poll, just one this time. I just want to know what your companies are doing about pay transparency. So grab your phone, scan this QR code, and then you can actually see. We'll look at some results together in 1 second. So the question is your company preparing for pay transparency? I like to share this. Here we go. I love watching the votes come in. I mean, like, I know people love watching election results, but I love watching these poll results more than anything. Oh, wow. More people are saying yes. Okay. 30 people. Let's get that number up. I want to see. Hmm?
50-50.
This is interesting. Oh, nose jumping up. What's that guy that does all like the election night data that everybody loves? I could have his job, I guess. I'm kidding. Oh, 50. Oh, God. This is what it feels like. All right, 44 people. We have 72 people here. Let's see if we can get a few more votes in. I want to get to like 50 votes just to see where we land. Okay. Yeah. Are you surprised, Lola, that it's this close?
Honestly, no. I thought it was going to be more like 60-40, 60 on the yes, but
yeah. When companies come to you, I know we have a whole set of questions on this later, but like quick teaser, when companies come to you and they're talking about, they need market data, they need to be preparing for pay transparency. How many of them are coming to you with like absolutely no work done? And how many of them are coming to you with like an understanding of actual pay transparency and what it means?
I would say roughly 85% have done minimal, if not anything, unfortunately.
Fix my problems for me.
But they have good intention. They just didn't know where to start. Even job leveling alone, they don't know where to start. So
we're going to get into that today. And we're going to give everyone here the framework for like how to start thinking about pay transparency. Okay, this is cool. Still 50. I really thought like more people were going to be saying no. So I'm really happy to see that this is the breakdown today. And I like can't wait for all of us to talk to each other about this. Okay, diving back into our slideshow. This is our like live Q&A section. So are you ready, Lola? I have the first question for you.
Go for it.
How should HR teams approach the new set of laws around pay transparency?
Yeah, invest in market data. So go fight for the budget for it. If you don't have it, share the ROI of getting market data. We'll talk a little bit more about how you can do that in a little bit. But yes, you need the market data to establish the ranges, right? Don't go using like crowdsourced data, like, what's on Glassdoor. It's just not reliable because, I could be, let's say I'm a senior software engineer. Let's say I go on Glassdoor and I can say, I make 200K. No, you don't. You make, 150 in base, 20K in bonus. The rest is equity, right? So as you can see from publicly sourced, it's just not as accurate. Yeah. Now, if budget really is super constrained, at least use your internal salary data. So what you're currently offering to your employees, break it out, of course, by ideally, that job family, that job level, and that location, aggregate it, and then use that as a reference to establish the ranges. Right?
For sure. I think the other interesting thing about pay transparency too is if folks aren't watching, like a lot of it is legislation is being passed on the state level. And so you have to be mindful, like reading that legislation. Sometimes I'm like, I should have gone to law school because the amount of like legislation I read, like you have to, from an HR people team perspective, to actually understand what the laws are saying you have to do. And it was interesting earlier this year, New York said everyone needed to be ready, I think by like end of summer, early October, and they might have just pushed it back like a little bit later. And so being mindful of the state headquarters for your company or like what the laws actually say about where your employees are located and what laws you have to abide by can feel like another full-time job for people ops folks. So there are some websites and shortcuts I can share where you can just look state by state what people are saying and how it applies to all of you. So highly recommend if you're an HR team in at least New York, California, or Washington and Colorado. Those are like the 4 big ones that really have like intense legislation going on. And I think there are another like 15 states that are introducing legislation to impact pay transparency. And if we were to define pay transparency, Lola, how would you define it?
Oh, that's a good question. At its minimum is just being open with at least the process, how you even go about establishing your ranges and the timeline. So what I mean by that is like, it could be high level. You don't have to share the details of this, but here's our comp philosophy. We aim to target the market. You can be as simple as that, right? We target the market for cash and equity, right? Now, of course, you can, double click on that and say, we target the 50th percentile for non-technical roles and 75th for technical. You can get a little more detailed, but you could start somewhere in a phased approach to be more robust, right? And then honestly, like when you share with employees and managers, the simple timeline of, okay, not only here's our high level philosophy, but how we built out the ranges using this reliable market data. But also just here's our timeline in I'm just making this up, but like whatever applies to your company, every January and June, we do comp reviews. Most of the people fall under the January timeframe. The mid-year one is for mostly promotions, right? During both cycles, we can do promotion. We do promotions. We calibrate promotion. That's all. Like simple communication of even the process is super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you haven't been with me since my first I Hate It Here newsletter send on September 12th, I actually broke it out into 4 steps. I'm going to include that article back in the regroup of this. Recap of this event. I need more caffeine today. Recap of this event. I'll stick that link in there too. And it breaks it down like how to write a compensation philosophy, what you should be thinking, why that matters. All that details I put in my first ever send. So I'm going to share that again with this group because it's really impactful to understand pay transparency in general and also what you need to do specific to your organization. So our next question is, this is my fun one that I snuck in. I have this like belief that everybody thinks they're underpaid. It's my favorite when employees come to me and they're like, I'm underpaid. And I'm like, oh, really? Why do you think that? And they're like, well, I feel like I am. So Lola, I got to know, like, why do most people think they're underpaid?
It's like, no one ever says, oh, I think I'm overpaid, right? No one ever. I think it is simply like companies generally suck at job leveling and establishing guidelines on where to target employee along the range. So for example, like a lot of managers are green to even job leveling, right? So that employee that is compared to market might be compared to the wrong level because they're not even leveled correctly, right? Yeah. So the leveling and also the guideline on where to target an employee along the range. So I'm a visual person. So imagine you see like a rectangle, right? And you break it up in thirds. So there's 3 little, squares within the rectangle. The middle square is where you can target, like close to the midpoint of the range when someone is fully competent in the role, consistently performing, Yeah. But it's totally okay to target that first square, the entry point of the range, when you're new to the role. When you just got promoted into new role, it's totally fine that you're on the lower end of the range, or maybe you're a lower performer, right? And then on the upper end, of course, like you're likely consistently high performer. You might have even a special skill set and you're consistently, like that top performer and likely about to get promoted, right? So like use that range and those guidelines and share that with managers so they know how to properly use it, and recruiters. Yeah.
I really think like the majority of people who think they're underpaid, like just have never been told what their company's compensation philosophy is or what their job level is. And so then they approach it where they think like, oh, I should be paid so much more. I'm adding such a value to this company. I have such an impact and a scope of work. And the reality is they're like an IC2 and they don't actually impact like strategic work happening at the company that would justify that. So a quick note on job leveling, I also put this in that first newsletter send, but you can use a lot of different ways to level jobs. IC is a common methodology: individual contributor, manager, executive, ICME. You could just Google job leveling and there are a lot. You can go 1 through 7. How I think about it is like, imagine you're playing a video game and you're leveling up in the video game. That's basically what your job levels are. Like as you get higher, the work and the challenges you have in the video game get harder. And so that's just a fun way to think about when you're thinking about your employees and what kind of framework you want to build. I also encourage HR professionals to like build what works for you all. If you don't have somebody who would operate at an IC7, I think Lola can be like the highest, or you have like an additional level you want to add, I think like do what works for your org, but also levels.fyi is a great tool to look at for pay stuff too. So there's that. Also, I think I joked about this with Lola. If I had $1 for every time I got a Slack from a manager that was like, oh my God, someone thinks they're underpaid. What do I say? And I'm like, oh, I have failed you, my friend, because we have not told you how to talk about our compensation philosophy. So I know it's a lot to ask of your managers. We already ask a lot of managers in general, but explaining to your managers what pay is and why it matters and how you came to that number is super powerful for them as they're managing their team. I once had someone come to me like every 6 months and ask for a pay raise. And I had to be like, that's not how this works. Like, literally not how this works. Our next question. So this is a good one. How do you get CEOs and leadership's buy-in on investing in the market data?
Yeah. So essentially share the ROI and numbers tied to it, right? So for example, look, if we don't get this market data, we're not going to, of course, be able to pay not only our current employees, make sure they're being paid competitively, or close a candidate at a competitive offer and lose that potentially good talent there, right? Yeah. So the ROIs, for example, like 2 times employee salary, that's the cost if they leave, right? To go hire, the recruiting process, the whole onboarding, ramping them up, like on average costs 2 times their salary. And then if, invest in the market data and you could share that, that's just a fraction of what we would really need to pay like a senior comp analyst, a solid one that could do all the job leveling, build out comp ranges, align it to our comp philosophy, all that. That can cost like at least $150K for, that kind of senior comp analyst manager level, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. I've worked with CEOs that I've had to fight for their buy-in on this and CEOs that just get it. I always bring it back to time. Time is money and is a currency. And if you are not like paying people correctly, they will leave. You will have to replace them, which the team loses time. Your HR team loses time. You can't actually accomplish everything you need to accomplish within a set time frame. And so talking a lot about the value you get from market data, it ensures that you can retain and pay your employees competitively and also attract the top talent. I was telling Lola yesterday, like I could probably shot in the dark guess around where everyone should be making money for a role, but that's because I've seen enough market data at this point. But the market has changed. In the last year, it's changed. In the last 6 months, it's changed. In the last 3 months, it's changed. And so investing in a tool that has really fresh market data is super important, which is why I worked with Lola and CompSA because they update their data on a quarterly basis. And so there are other tools out there that only update on a yearly basis. And that to me is like really difficult to justify that investment because that means I'm paying my employees at any given point a year behind the actual market for their role. So that's just one thing to think about. And market data, I think, is like the number one investment as an HR team. If I were to ask for anything, I would put market data probably in like the top 3 asks of mine. And I know with layoffs and how the economy is going, budgets have been really tight, but this is one that will make a big difference in your organization to make sure that you can retain and attract like the best talent out there. So one thing to think about. Okay, next question. I like to think I'm a positive person, but sometimes I like to focus on what's going wrong. So Lola, tell me, like, what are companies doing wrong around pay and or pay transparency laws?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but it's, the job leveling part, right? So making sure you're not, training, communicating with managers on how to do job leveling properly so that you can get it right up front. Like, the recruiter and the hiring manager can get that hiring decision right up front where it aligns with the business needs, right? So I see that very commonly not done right is just lack of job leveling and leveling properly. And then you just like mishire, and then it could be a waste of money for the company, for example. The other thing is just, yes, compensation can be kind of a scary topic to communicate to employees, but just start somewhere. And you could, like I said, start high level, but communicate something like high level comp philosophy, how you go about establishing ranges. Again, it could be high level. You don't have to share too much detail, and the timeline. So honestly, as as soon as you do that, all the questions and, any disgruntled employees that keep asking in those all hand meetings, those questions about comp, it literally almost like goes away just by simply communicating those things, right? So.
Love that. God, I wish everyone had their video on because I have like a show of hands question, but I'm just going to describe a scenario. And if you've been in this scenario, please like thumbs up or yes in the chat. A hiring manager comes to you and they only have a set budget for a role. So they end up hiring someone more junior. They come to you 6 months later and they say, ooh, I messed up. I hired someone way too junior to try to save money. And now I actually need to hire someone more senior or I'm really struggling. How many times has this happened? Because I think my theory is, and I'm not saying it the chat pop up, but maybe my theory is that like when we think about how to spend company resources, especially around money and hiring, a lot of people will make a bad decision and opt to hire more junior level talent because they think it's cheaper, when in reality, they could have just hired one mid-level or senior person and they would not be in the predicament they were in. Mm-hmm. Ola, have you seen that happen?
Yeah, all the time. Like, oh, we had this budget this much, so we hired 2 IC2 level financial analysts, and then it's like, oh, they couldn't meet our needs. I could have just saved actually money and hired 1 senior financial analyst and been able to get all that more strategic, finance stuff done, right?
Yeah. This was a big conversation topic at HR Therapy Live 2 weeks ago, where folks were saying that like headcount planning is really hard because people don't understand like levels or like what's expected of people or scope of work. And I think like the sister to that or the puzzle piece is like, because they don't understand that, they are never going to be able to do pay or pay transparency laws well, where it's not going to result in like more problems than solutions. Mm-hmm. So that's just one thing to think about. Like if you are a company who's in infant stages of pay transparency, like always, always, always start with the job leveling. Start with understanding like where is the talent in your org in its current state? Is it mostly junior? Is it mostly mid? Is it very top heavy? And then use that to inform how you set your bands and then how you hire in the future. It's all connected. And I think if you can get pay transparency right, a lot of the problems we see later in the employee life cycle or in an employee's experience at the company all comes back to that very beginning. Did we pay them correctly and level them correctly? That's going to be my new philosophy. Okay, live Q&A. Tyler's going to drop a link in the chat. And y'all can ask us questions live, or I can continue to pepper Lola on all of the things about pay transparency. And let me just pull up our Slido because we have some questions. See, it's flowing in. Live Q&A. Here we go. We have a few questions. Lola, are you ready?
Yeah.
First one. I work at a nonprofit where we can't always meet market norms. How do you compromise with talented staff who are understandably upset by this?
Mm-hmm. So first, because obviously as a not-for-profit, you shouldn't compare the employees' pay against like tech industry market data. So go find yourself some good, solid market comp data for not-for-profits, which CompSA has. But yes, like let's say, and it's not just not-for-profit organizations. A lot of companies nowadays have restricted budget. Yeah. So you want to tap into that, the EVP, if you will, the employee value proposition. So, what is their growth opportunity and development opportunity there? And that's why those career paths are so important to share. Like, here's where you are now, but this is what you could, here's this like another opportunity you can have. You can even go from marketing to product manager, right? You can show them the whole career path across the org. So basically focus on the EVP and also, of course, for tech industry where you can offer stock options. Of course, that doesn't cost any money. So it is a retention tool, right? So look into refresh grant opportunities, right?
Yeah. I think it's always so hard for folks in the nonprofit space because it's historically known like they can't pay. It's a not-for-profit organization, so they can't pay at market competitive rates. But I think there's nothing wrong with saying like we pay at 25% of the market, which is like kind of hard to hear. So like maybe not. I'm thinking about this live and out loud. It's tough though. And I think like the staff can be upset about it, but they also chose the career path too. And so it's kind of hard for you as the employer to be put in a hard spot because they chose this avenue for them, knowing that like it's not a lucrative job. So that's I'm trying to like balance the like delicate and kind of like harsh approach to it. But that's one thing to consider. Like you are not for profit. You can't afford to pay those rates, and being honest with your staff about that as well, I think will be very helpful.
And emphasize the mission of the organization too, of course.
Yeah. I think every single person I know that works at a nonprofit has always said to me, like, I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this because I'm doing something that's like good for me. But it's hard because if they can't pay their livable rent or like food and inflation is so high, it's tough. Someone made a comment in the chat that said, I think it's important that nonprofits benchmark consistently. If you benchmark pay against nonprofits, you can't benchmark them business development or working hours against for-profit consulting firms. So similar to what Lola said, make sure you are benchmarking to your actual industry. Next question. When sharing the compensation ladder with the team, do you have to share everyone's comp with the entire team?
No.
I can answer. Hell no.
F no. And I like
F no.
Yeah.
Lola.
I don't even know where to start on this one. If you do want to, so before you even share ranges, make sure you do all the things we discussed before. It's like, make sure like high level comp philosophy, timeline, start with that as phase one. Then maybe like next year, move on to the next. But before you share ranges, I would even make sure leadership managers are trained and very knowledgeable on all those things of comp philosophy, how the ranges are established, et cetera, before you go blasting out all the ranges, right? And then when you're in that, phase 3 part, you could post the ranges, and, like start with even like the major job families. Let's say 40% of your workforce is like software engineers. Go ahead and post the software engineers and for the common locations, right? But I definitely am against and here's the range for this global mobility manager. Everybody knows there's only one in the company. Like they don't need, so just high level is fine. And honestly, too much detail is not really needed. It's more of a distraction.
Yeah. There are 2 layers to pay transparency when we're talking about it, right? One of them is what the laws are all passed around, which is having bands and ranges for every role or role type that you are hiring for. There's also another level that is like, I'm not going to call it extreme because I don't think that's fair, but like where everyone's salary is visible to everyone else. I only know like 3 or 4 orgs that do that. And they started the company with that philosophy. They did not wait till like year 5 to suddenly expose everyone's data. And they also made it very clear to all their employees joining us, this is your salary. It will be on display for everybody because this is what we do with our salaries. So there are 2 ranges to it, right? You do not have to go and do I'm going to tell you everyone's salaries. That's only for a subset of orgs that really want to do that. The pay transparency laws are really around having ranges for jobs that are open. Mm-hmm. So that's just something to think about. So let's see. Someone asked the question, our staff are mad that the comp on public postings is not much less than theirs. Mm-hmm. They want to make more than the new staff. Mm-hmm. We are very transparent. What would you do?
Mm-hmm. And this is why factoring in your internal data is important, right? So before you go post the ranges, make sure you're balancing the market data, if you have it, and the internal data so that you can prevent, disgruntled employees, right? So that would be the simple answer.
Cool. I would also say the same, like always start with benchmarking your internal before you post something external. And like what is required of the new jobs might be different than the current staff. And as long as you can explain either the job or the level or where the role is in the band is different, then I think that should alleviate their concerns. Honestly, I think every employee, the second you post anything on a job, is going to go look to find the closest job to them to check to see if they're being paid correctly. So to get ahead of that, start with your compensation philosophy, communicate it to your entire staff, and make it clear if we're posting a role, it is going to be like leveled for that job, and that might not map specifically to your job. So comparing them is not going to actually be helpful. It's tough. I said, I think like on 2 HR therapies ago, like don't do this job if you don't like conflict, because I think like one of the biggest conflicts for HR is like compensation, because I do think people commonly think that they're underpaid. And so like, if you cannot explain why people aren't underpaid and like continue having the conversation, this job is going to be awful for you. Someone asked a great question. What market data resources do you recommend for startups that can't afford CompSA?
Mhm. Oh, honestly, good solid market data is going to cost you something, but if you need to start somewhere, I would do start with the internal average data, right? Because like I said, really publicly sourced data, it's just not as reliable. You can't like kind of filter it by location, for example, either easily. So
I think if you don't have market data or can't afford it, also doing an analysis on your hiring process, how many candidates are turning you down for compensation as the reason, making sure you have like a feedback loop of if people are turning you down or if people are leaving the company, what are the reasons? And if compensation continues to be the main reason, then I think you have your justification for market data. Also, I'll text my friends that do the job somewhere else and I'll say, hey, how much are you paid? My friends have witnessed a very interesting radicalization of me as a person where I'll just tell my friends how much money I make and ask them how much money they make. And I told them by sharing with me, you're only making me like better at my job. And I'm more aware if you're underpaid or not. So when I couldn't get my hands on market data in the past, I would ask friends who do the job at different types of companies how much they were paid. I think it led to some awkward conversations with my friends, but it worked out fine for me. I love this question. If during my next compensation/annual review, I'm not offered a raise I feel is equitable or appropriate, how can I ask for more without coming across as entitled?
Yeah, I would share what value you're bringing in your role and how you've performed and examples like measurable things that you've achieved with the team and the company. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like my take on this, I've coached several friends on how to do this as well. If you are being asked to do more work or take on a bigger scope of work that's going to have a more sizable impact on the company, you should also get a compensation raise. And I think this concept, I love whoever asked the question because they cared about how they came across as entitled. There's nothing entitled about asking for the compensation you deserve to do the job you're doing. And I think oftentimes women specifically and people of color are told like, don't ask for that. You don't want to come across as entitled. And that is like really bad advice because you should be asked to be paid equitable to like your peers and also equivalent to the work and scope and impact you have on an organization. So highly recommend like taking away the ick feeling from asking for compensation, because that is how companies historically have gotten away with doing the wrong thing and paying people inequitably, is that we have this conception that we can't ask for the things we're supposed to ask for. Okay. How do you think about tenure requirements for promotion when job leveling? And should that be shared in the job posting? How do you think about tenure requirements for promotion when job leveling? And should that be shared in the job posting?
Yeah, I think it's fine to use what is, that minimally required years of experience for that role, right? As like a factor, right? But for a receptionist, let's say you have a receptionist job opening, right? The candidate might have 10, 20 years of experience, but what you minimally require for that role is more like 1 to 2 years of administrative experience, right? So in that case, the company might weigh it less, right? So,
yeah, I think the thing that you taught me about job leveling, Lola, when I used CompSA was like, you can use the years of experience as, or like tenure requirements as a data point, but you're really supposed to be thinking about like, what is the impact this job has on the organization and how much of their work that they are driving forward without direction. Yep. And so I think a lot of people tend to say like, oh, you need 5 years of experience to get this promotion. I truly don't think about that. Ooh, someone had a clarification. To clarify, I meant years in the position before promotion eligibility. We run into people who take a role they view as too junior, thinking they can promote quickly when our policies don't allow for that. So your policies have probably like a minimum amount of time in seat before they can be eligible for a promotion. I think some companies it's like 1 year, some companies it's 2 years. Yeah. I would revisit that policy This is probably a really hot, controversial take. So if you don't agree with this, tell me in the chat. There shouldn't be a minimum requirement for getting a promotion. I know that's a really scary thing to say because then you're going to have all your employees say, hey, I deserve a promotion every 6 months. But I think the reality is if someone comes in and adds a ton of value to the org, they should not be held back by the fact that the job was not leveled correctly and they were not assessed correctly in the hiring process. I see people saying they agree. I have been held back by a promotion like minimum amount and I almost rioted. Mm-hmm. I'm probably like the worst colleague anyone ever wants because I'm like, we should not do that. Someone said we were told that tenure requirements prevent nepotism and support DEI goals. I don't think that's quite fair. I think your promotion, yeah. There's so much I want to dissect about this. Like we're about to go to a different rabbit hole, but like my one last thing is like, if you have good promotional guidelines written, what is a promotion? What does it mean? Who has to sign off on it? It should take away the bias piece of it and the work should speak for itself. I also talked to someone, interestingly enough, like I'm going to toy with this topic, maybe in HR Therapy season 2, where they tell their employees, like, you can raise your hand to ask to have your job leveled and scoped appropriately, or your manager can advocate for you for a promotion. And then it becomes kind of a two-way street where the employee can say, hey, I think I'm due for a promotion. The HR team will evaluate them and let them know yes or no. And their manager can also do that. And that's to help the nepotism piece.
I also think what works well is like, those say 2 times a year promotion opportunities so that you can calibrate across the organization, all those promotions to make sure you're promoting the right people, right? So.
Yeah. And also like work should speak for itself. Like it shouldn't just be like a promotion form. Like, why do you want to promote this person? There should be like guidelines and things they have to do to be like qualified to get that promotion. Not eligible. I think you should be eligible at any time, but qualified. I love this next question. Do you have a response or a reframe to, I think we should flatten the hierarchy and everyone should be paid the same?
Wow. Yeah, I don't think it's a good, like budget-wise, fiscally responsible decision, right? So it's in an organization, you need, there's the more routine jobs, and then there's ones that have more like higher impact, especially like revenue generating impact, right? So it might be doable in the beginning when you're kind of small, and wearing multiple hats, right? But as you scale and grow, not possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this one so many times because the equality piece of it is very alluring to me. Like everyone gets paid the same. Yes, I can be on board with that. And the reality is people add different value to the company. And so it's like if you have an engineer, your engineer is creating like actual IP that then makes you money. If you have salespeople, they are selling the thing that keeps the revenue going so that all of you can be employed. And so I think the reality is like people will never be paid exactly the same, despite it being good in theory. It's like really hard in practice. Like Lola said, not the best business decision. Pay is also how you incentivize people and reward their impact and value to the company. And that's really hard to hear as an HR person because historically, I have been told that HR people are paid less. And I think that has changed in the last 5 to 10 years. And so that's really hard. Someone made a comment like, if you have an HR leader preventing the entire place from crashing and burning, we all wish we could have that person. Let's see. This is a great question. Our raises are voted on by the board of directors, and we are not allowed to be present to advocate for our value. Is this normal?
No, that is not normal, especially if they're reviewing like non-executive pay and, making non-executive pay decisions. So yeah, I would, fight for, leaders to make that decision and make them comfortable by saying, hey, we're going to buy market data if you haven't already to analyze it against. We're not going to do a finger. And here's our kind of structure and process and idea on how to do this going forward in a thoughtful way. Can we do this now with leadership instead of the board? Right.
If Glassdoor is unreliable, any other alternatives that you trust?
I think in the chat, some folks provide some recommendations. So feel free to go through the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some recommendations. So to be clear, like Glassdoor is unreliable, but I love looking at it to see like what people are saying. I'm just like, maybe I just like to read the tea every now and then. It's like glassdoorsalary.com. Sometimes I'll just Google like what's the average compensation of this role just to see what the internet is saying. And it's not usually right, but it's also not usually that far off. And so I just think it depends. Like the Googling is like what I do as a free resource. And then when I have market data, I compare them. And the market data, I think, lets me zero in and refine my offer. And how I think about it is like if I make a offer without the real market data and it's wrong and the candidate turns us down, I just wasted everyone's time.
Yeah, it might not be the most efficient thing, but go on other companies' job postings since folks are starting to post ranges, look for those jobs. Yeah, again, not the most efficient, but you could do that.
Someone mentioned like beware that Indeed will publish an estimated salary range and they're not actually close. I don't know where they're getting those estimated salary ranges, by the way. I would not look at Indeed. I love this next question. I'm at a nonprofit where staff want to align salaries to social justice values, not market norms. What can and should we do? That's a very interesting idea.
That is interesting. What I do see sometimes is like performance rating scales tied to company value topics. So I see that, but I honestly have not seen like, increased guidelines tied to that. So it's usually like based on comp ratio or the health of your current pay against market and performance rating, but not values, right? So
I have never seen that. So I think it's really intriguing that your org is doing this. If you want to email me after this, I'd love to like pick your brain and see how it's being done.
Same organization with the board looking at all them.
Yeah, I mean, is this the same org with the board? Yes, either one of you, if you'd like to email me, it's HipAtWorkWeek. I'm very intrigued because I've never seen that done. Like market really has been what everybody aligns to because the market determines, can you pay your bills and buy your food? Right? Like that's what it's taking into account, like how all of it compares to each other and the ratio that Lola was talking about and what you would command for this role. So that's just something very interesting.